Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for the session on climate, housing, and health, how to build equitable and inclusive urban resilience. My name is Lauren Sorkin, and I am the Executive Director of the Resilient Cities Network. And I want to thank the Resilience Hub for hosting this session today. The Resilience Hub is a really important space where we really do hold conversations that address complex issues. And for ourselves at the Resilient Cities Network, we're no strangers to that. For the last decade, we've been working with our 100 city members in 40 countries, some of whom you'll hear from today, to build holistic resilience to our complex challenges, environmental, economic, and social. And we do this through knowledge partnerships, and finance. And so very pleased to be with you all today for this session. This is Urbanization Multi-Level Governance Day. And if you are in this session, you are probably no stranger to the fact that by 2050, we will have an additional 2.5 billion people living in cities. This is an incredible challenge, and we'll hear about some of those challenges today, but it's also an incredible opportunity. An opportunity to build better for people, for their health, and for the climate in intersecting ways. And so for today's discussion, we are going to talk about that and how to really put communities and their needs and equity at the heart of that discussion. And I have with me today a really expert panel, people who have been doing this work on the ground, studying these issues for a very long time. And so these people are those who hold the space, and I know that in this audience, we also have a number of people who hold that space. And so I really wanted to appreciate all of you and this community that we're in of resilience practitioners as we kick this off. So let me introduce this panel that we have here today. To my left, I have Dr. Folayinka Dania. She is the Chief Resilience Officer of Lagos State. She leads the Resilience Office there. I have Professor Jeanette Ixkovics, who is, I am going to get this right, I promise, this name, the Samuel N. Lisselot Ehrman Professor of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Yale School of Public Health. You can just say she's Professor Jeanette from Yale, if that's easier for you. And then I have the pleasure of welcoming Ariana Karamalis, who's the Global Advocacy and Development Associate at Build Change. And then across the way, I have Bijal Brahmbhatt, who is the director of the Mahila Housing Trust, and we're looking forward to hearing about your amazing work. We have the city leader of Glasgow, Councillor Susan Aiken, with us, and we have Nisera Wanjiru, who is from SDI. And finally, we have Emmanuel from Saint-Gobain. And Emmanuel, I am going to say your last name. It was on a different page. We have Emmanuel Normand, who is the Vice President for Sustainable Development of Saint-Gobain. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon. I also want to let you know that this session is going to be captured by graphic recorders who are online, Desiree Llanos D and Nityalia Saulo from Tofu Creative, so thank you, and we're looking forward to seeing your incredible work later. I am now going to invite Dr. Dania to give us a lightning talk on this issue. As I mentioned, Dr. Dania is the Chief Resilience Officer of Lagos State and herself a doctor. So Dr. Dania, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. So first of all, I want to tell you about Lagos. So Lagos is a state in Nigeria. It is the financial capital of Nigeria. It's not the national capital, but it's the financial capital of Nigeria. And everybody who wants to be prosperous finds their way to Lagos one way or the other, sometimes with their last cent. So it's a small state, 3,557 square kilometers, 20% of which comprises of water bodies. It has a 180-kilometer shoreline. And we have a population of over 25 million people. That's an estimate because census hasn't been done since 2006. It's estimated that about 85 people come into Lagos per minute, and most of them never leave in that small space. So you can imagine these people come into Lagos, and Lagos is an expensive city. In fact, it's even been assessed as more expensive than even New York. So you have people coming into Lagos where there's no access to affordable housing to live and to work. They end up in informal settlements and slums. There's some estimates that has said that almost 65% of the population of Lagos State live in slums and informal settlements. Now, let's layer that with our climate impact drivers: sea level rise, extreme rainfall, extreme heat, flooding. Who are the people that are most susceptible to this? These same people that end up in the slums. They're the ones most susceptible to waterborne diseases and vector-borne diseases. So that's an intersection. And they're the ones who also do not have access to climate-resistant housing. So you have these people who have come for livelihoods, their health is affected, they don't have access to housing, and they're also impacted by climate change. These people are very, very important to us in Lagos State. And we've estimated that if we do nothing about climate change in the next 30 years or 20 years in Lagos State, the cost of inaction for us in Lagos State will be over $39 billion. But we've done some analytical work and evidence-based approach to do some of this assessment, and we've assessed that the cost of action for us in Lagos State now will be about $9 billion if we want to prevent what could go wrong in the next few years. So there are a number of things that we are doing, as in to see how we can put forward minimum basic healthcare packages for the population as a whole without necessarily skewing towards the rich, but also ensuring that the poor and the vulnerable have access to affordable healthcare. We're also trying to make sure that we can also track what are the diseases that are coming out, what are the outbreaks that are happening, as in how do we prioritize data collection to ensure that we can identify the diseases once they break and ensure that we are able to respond, our health system is able to respond to those diseases as they happen. But we've also had this conversation as in which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you go after the health or do you go after housing? Housing is a big issue for us. In Lagos, land is gold. Small space, a large number of people. How do you put in place social housing? So one of the things that we've begun to do, or we've just started to do, as in to improve housing for people, is we've begun to look at how do we identify land that we can put forward for social housing. As in, how do we make it easy for people to be able to pay monthly rents? Because where we come from, it's not easy to collect monthly rents. We're always looking at annual rents or biannual rents. As in, but how do we also protect the landlords who will collect the monthly rents? Because we're talking about people that live in informal settlements and slum who make money per day. How do you make them put together money that they can use to eat today and put it together for them to be able to pay rents for the whole year? So one of the innovative things that we're doing is we're looking at how do we put land forward and make it easy for developers to build. And we're also looking at how do we review our laws to ensure that the landlords are also protected when it comes to collecting money. So I know a lot of people don't think that housing is related to health, but the truth of the matter is housing is at the center of public health, whether we like it or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dani. I think you painted such a clear picture, and the scale of what's happening in Lagos is so impressive. I think no one listening to your remarks would question that those are daunting challenges, and that people and their health are at the absolute heart of what you're thinking about every day. I want to come to you, Jeanette, and talk about some of these impacts. This has been such a journey. I remember when you came to me probably about 4 years ago. Was it 3 or 4 years ago? Two since we've really been working on it, but since we started talking about these issues of health in cities, but then climate and health in cities about 2 years ago, we started talking about we need to look at this much more closely and how this is going to be developing. And now here we are, and this has been the first COP to have a health day. And we've seen a lot of headlines about that. But when we're talking about public health, what are really the issues that we're confronting? And how do we need to think about of looking at these and prioritizing these public health issues?
Thank you, Lauren. As you said, Dr. Dania, you painted a picture on the ground. Let me try to take it up to 10,000 feet and think about this globally. So I have really been surprised. I'm amazed that we're sitting at a COP and people are still saying to me, not any of you, I'm sure, but what is the relationship between health and climate? What is not the relationship between health and climate? And every major category of disease, infectious disease, chronic disease, mental health, and illness, injury and death, all of those categories have direct and indirect ties through climate. And in cities, as you described, they are exacerbated. So let's just take a few examples there. For infectious disease, we know that with climate, with warming temperatures, of course the vectors, the mosquitoes and other vectors are moving, and they're in much broader areas, and they're staying for longer seasonality. And then when we have population density in climates, and particularly in informal settlements, we have much more risk of infectious disease and infectious disease transmission. Likewise, heat. When we are in cities, there are heat climate effects. So we've got the buildings and the roads that are capturing the heat. And together with lack of green space, we don't have that carbon capture, that reflection. And so the heat-related illness, and also tied to this, air pollution in cities, compounding. We really see increased risk for heart disease, for stroke, people with pre-existing conditions, of course. And last thing I'll say for now is that we also need to think, and this is bringing people to the center of this, about those who are most vulnerable. And I will also flip it and say those for whom we must empower the most. And it begins in an area that I've worked in for more than 30 years, pregnancy. We need to begin life with good health. Our pregnant women, our children, outdoor workers, and older adults are most vulnerable. And so as we think about climate, health, housing, and equity, this is where we need to think about empowerment. And as you say, and I believe we'll turn it to you in a moment, housing is absolutely essential because we cannot be dealing with health, with mental health, with jobs, with food security if there is not stable housing.
Thank you, Jeanette. I think you really clearly outlined both the areas of health that we have to be focusing on and also those populations, and where they stay is very important. And on that note, Ariana, I want to turn it to you. I mean, build change is no stranger to complex and intersecting challenges in the housing space. For so long, you all have been at the forefront of looking at earthquake security, affordability, and different transsectional issues. When we look at public health, what is it that you would recommend this group take away from this discussion on housing and health?
Thank you so much, and so nice to be here with you all. Well, first of all, I think that Dr. Dania, you summed it up actually really well. She said housing is at the center of public health, whether we like it or not. And I thought, well, there you go. And then, with what Jeanette just said as well, safe homes that are resilient to the impacts of climate change, which, and support climate adaptation, are really what we're concerned with. And with climate change impacts, we're looking at more extreme weather, more disasters as well. So it's not, it's both the chronic stresses of climate change, but also those acute disasters. So the housing that we're advocating for is safe, resilient, adequate housing that can withstand that, And so there's the loss of life that happens with disasters, if people don't live in safe homes. And then on a daily basis, if people don't have access to a home that is well ventilated, has access to clean water, safe sanitation services, there's a direct link there too. So all of us, when we do structural resilience upgrades, we're also looking at those habitability upgrades. So one example that I'll touch on is some work that we've done in Honduras, where there's an increase in flooding over the past few years, really severe flooding. And while the communities have, kind of been able to cope with it in the past, in more recent years with the warming climate, the flooding has become so extreme that really they would have to leave if there's not something done about it. And of course, climate forced migration, makes it so that people are leaving their livelihoods, their communities. That's not really viable. So what we've done is we strengthened the first stories of those homes, and then we added a second story, which means that when flooding happens, they can go up to the second story, stay dry, and stay safe, and protect their livelihoods. They don't have to leave. In addition, we were able to improve basic services while doing that. So add the ability for solar electricity, for rainwater catchment systems, and improve the sanitation services. So at the same time, kind of building all of that in so that safe, adequate housing, they have access to services that also improve health.
Thank you for that. I think it's very clear with the multiple challenges that exist. You also have this opportunity, and you shared with us something that's actually quite hopeful, and that you're adding different services to housing in order to provide benefits, because you can see the challenges coming down the pike. I think someone else who's very carefully looking at challenges for vulnerable communities and trying to help them get ahead of that is you, Bijal. You have been working with women across many states in India, in hard-to-reach places, not just in the cities that everyone knows about, but in secondary and tertiary cities. Can you talk to us about how the climate change impacts are affecting the communities you work with, and how are these events, and in particular rising temperatures, directly affecting public health in urban environments?
Yeah, so we have been been working with poor women in the informal sector. And we must understand that housing for them is also a place of work. So it's not only a place where they live, but they work. So they probably roll cigarettes, they stitch clothes, they make kites, and so it's a place of work. And women who we work with have reported that, with the increase in heat, say, for example, not only has their productive capacity decreased, they have been spending more on health, like small things like having prickly heat powder or maybe having, cold drinks. And they have been reporting things like, fetching more water to sort of take care of the children, or because their children and family then take bath often. They have been reporting incidents of herpes, of skin disease, some things like, when these houses get flooded, they say that the men folk are on the top, on the terraces, and we are the ones who get down and clean the muck which has entered the house because of the flooding. And then the mortality rate of women at that point in time really increases. Herpes, they have reported. So all these kinds of, health impacts. But at the same time, productivity also reduces, expenses on health increases, and the dual care burden and the cognitive burden, yeah? Because you have to take care of your children who are living in a heat-affected house and falling often ill. So it multiplies many folds for women. And I think the key to that is how do you really empower them? And this results into already spoken vector-borne disease episodes. Chikungunya, malaria have been increasing. Mortality rates increase of heat strokes. Mortality rates in cities with air pollution have been reported to be extremely high, and I think mental health also is becoming a big issue. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. We are going to move from India someplace very different, and that is to the city of Glasgow. Susan, can you share with us what the communities in Glasgow are confronting, and perhaps some of the actions that you're taking to help them prepare for climate-related health impacts?
And so the climate-related health impacts in Glasgow are less directly to do with climate change itself than with the creators of climate change. Because we're a post-industrial city, but also a moderate climate. We are seeing climate impact, more rain, more flooding, and colder winters. We don't really suffer from extreme heat in Glasgow or in Scotland, particularly. But we are starting to see some climate impact. But the built environment of Glasgow, which is a city that was the centre of the Industrial Revolution, has been a very high carbon built environment for centuries, and has contributed to the situation we find ourselves in today across the planet with global heating. And that built environment continues to this day to have an impact on people's health, as well as contributing to emissions. And housing is one of the key areas where that happens. So we have very high levels in comparison to other cities in the UK, in Glasgow, of energy poverty and energy insecurity. And just to make you aware, right now in the UK, energy prices are at record levels. Even people on decent incomes over the past year and a half have been struggling to pay their fuel bills. For the first time, people are finding that their income, which up until this point has been fine, it's allowed them to pay their bills and to have a standard of living, no longer allows them to do that because inflation in energy and food has been so extreme in the UK, and it is pushing people into poverty. And in Glasgow, we already had quite high rates of fuel poverty of around 30%, primarily driven by homes that were built with very low standards of energy efficiency. They're mainly either people who own their homes but have low incomes and have bought low quality built homes, or people in the private rented sector where landlords have made no investment at all in the quality and the energy efficiency of buildings over a long number of years. But in the past year or so, we've seen energy poverty rates rise to 60%. And in some communities, there probably isn't a single household where people are not facing energy poverty. So for us, the energy efficiency of buildings and of people's homes is absolutely crucial. We have plans to undertake a £10 billion plus investment in 430,000 homes across our Metro City region, which are the ones that we've identified as being most in need of insulation and other energy efficiency measures. And the consequence of that, we believe, will not only lead to massive reductions in energy poverty, hopefully, ultimately, its eradication and energy insecurity, but also significant improvements in health, because people in our cold, wet winters that we have in Scotland, that we've always had, if people are not heating their homes because they're scared to put their heating on because they can't afford it, they become sick. Their homes become damp, they get respiratory conditions, people who already have conditions like asthma, it becomes much worse and they become ill. So we believe that investment, huge though it is, £10 billion investment in adapting the least energy efficient homes across our city region will reap multiple benefits. And in actual fact, the feasibility work that we've done in it suggests that we'll reap the benefit cost ratio of that £10 billion investment will be 14 to 1, not only in the creation of the jobs and skills that will be required to do that work, but also in improved health, improved mental health as well, because people will have better security of income and just much more stress-free lives if they know that they're going to be able to heat their homes and crucially keep their children warm as well. But I want to give just one point about where there's real hope. Glasgow in many ways is a microcosm of a story about housing and health. 20 years ago, Glasgow had some of the worst social rented housing in the whole of Europe. The council that I now lead, Glasgow City Council, was a slum landlord. And that's not an exaggeration. Some of the quality of the housing that we had in the city was truly appalling. And the health outcomes of the people that lived in that housing were also appalling. No surprise there. But 20 years ago, the tenants of the city took part in a ballot and they voted to transfer the entirety of the city's housing stock to a network of community-led, and that is very important, community-led housing associations who became their new landlords. And over the last 20 years, there's been a programme of demolition and refurbishment and rebuilding of Glasgow's homes. And some of our social rented stock is now not only among the best in Europe, it is better that we are setting the standards through social housing for the private sector. So we apply something called the Glasgow Gold Standard for energy efficiency, which is considerably above what the national legislation requires of the private sector. We also have created space standards so that there's going to be space for a child to do their homework when they come home from school, for example. Something very small like that, but creates a huge difference for a child in their academic attainment and their ability to change their life choices. And in Glasgow, in most other cities, certainly in Scotland, and in the developed world, if you put a map of the least energy efficient homes on top of a map of where social rented housing are, they will almost completely match. They will go together. But in Glasgow, it's the opposite, because our social rented homes are leading the way. They are now the most energy efficient, and the difference that we're seeing in educational outcomes for children and young people, and starting to see differences in health outcomes as well, is testament to that. And the community-led bit of it is absolutely crucial. That's what's made it a success. So Glasgow has huge challenges around health and housing, and housing and poverty still, but we also have a big example of what's possible if communities are allowed to have their say and lead the way in deciding what happens to the homes that they live in.
Thank you so much, Susan. And that's actually a perfect segue into the question that I have for you, Nasira. We heard from Susan about the different kinds of challenges that exist in Glasgow and how those challenges were turned on their head into an opportunity to take social housing that was really poor and causing terrible health outcomes, and then to come up with a community-led solution to deliver value and keep communities safe, and actually push the private sector a bit to adopt some of these standards and do better in the face of common challenges. Nisara, in Kenya, how are these issues of health and housing intersecting? And what are some of the opportunities you see for bringing communities into the solutions to those challenges?
How are you? Good evening to you all. My name is Nisera, and I am from SDI. SDI, we have 3 objectives. That is housing, that you see there. And climate and health is a cross-cutting issue. And you have housing, rent, and services. So I come from a big city. And the big city is within many informal settlements. And I come from one of the informal settlements, that is Kibra. And as I think about this topic that we are discussing now, that is climate, housing, and health, I am thinking about my house back home in Kibra. That is 10 by 10. I think about the houses of my brothers and sisters in the same area, whereby during the rainy seasons, when it floods, we have to vacate the houses and go somewhere else to seek refuge. On the other hand, we are using illegal connections. These illegal connections, it means that we have blackouts each and every day, and we have to use paraffin lamps. We have to use charcoal. And this is affecting our kids so much. Because in fact, my house doesn't have a window. If you come there, in fact, I should invite, when you come to Nairobi, make sure you call me and I'll take you to my house. We don't have a window. And this is not just my situation. It's thousands and thousands of women, of people living along the informal settlement. And as we talk about the health is becoming a major disaster when it comes to climate change, because we've somehow we turned a blind eye when it comes to issues of health and climate change. Lots of people are dying because of the flooding. Lots of people are dying because of the mental health that they are going through. I have documented stories whereby I had to go for counseling. I am documenting stories of 5 dead people in the informal settlement. That was in Kibra. You go to one point, you find a dead body. the next point, 2 people's dead. You can imagine the kind of situations that we are living. But again, I must say, we cannot keep on speaking about these problems. There's something that is being done. And with SDI, we have made sure that we are doing vulnerability mapping in these areas. And we are also working with communities to make sure we strengthen their capacities in terms of livelihood, because livelihood is one of the key factors that is making us communities live in such areas. So we have made sure that despite the challenges that we are facing, that is how on climate, on housing, that we've gone ahead to give some funding. We gave some funding. We've demonstrated that funding can get back to the community. And with the first funding, for example, we work with 66 groups in the informal settlements, whereby we were working also with the hard-to-reach team. The hard-to-reach are the people who don't have, who don't understand clearly, who not understanding. They are doing the stuff in the community. But again, when it comes to looking for the funding, it becomes so difficult to them to access that funding. But for us as DI, we said we should give them the funding, and we have seen the kind of impact they have brought in. The next thing is about the climate refugees. To tell you for sure, we know that climate refugees are only in the camps, but each and every day we are having a lot of climate refugees, especially in terrains. We are having the shift in, if I live in Kibra, for example, and it has started raining and it floods, I'll be forced to go to another informal settlement to seek refuge there, whereby if I was having my business in Kibra, I will be forced to close that business and go somewhere else to seek refuge, or in another place. And then some other people will be coming to my informal settlement to stay there. So so yes. So basically what I'm trying to say, there is a problem, and we should also be keen. We should also be keen and make sure that when we speak about climate change, let's also speak about let's also even speak about these people behind the cameras, because whatever they go through, if you are documenting stories about climate change, the first-hand stories about climate change, I tell you for sure, you are going through a tough time. Because I went to Marawi. I went to Marawi in Chikwawa to document some stories, and it was so devastating. So basically, this is all going around like climate, health, and housing. It connects so well. It connects, and you have to do something about it.
Thank you, Nusera. Thank you for holding the space not only for your community, but for other communities whose stories that you're documenting and you're sharing. And I think you're right. We can't jump to solutions. We need to take the time to understand the problem, to talk about the problem. And what's very clear from all of what you are saying is the baseline of service is very, very low. And unless you understand that where you're starting from, the solutions will never be adequate. And I think what you talked about in terms of everyone's business being based in their home resonates a lot with also what we heard about the women in India. So when we have health threats that are coming home, they're also coming to your work. Right? They're coming to those places at the same time. They're coming for your family and for your business at the same time, and that's very intimidating. We have been talking a lot about these challenges and the need to keep communities and equity at the center. And I have a question that I will pose to the audience now. Okay, because resilience building, as you've heard, is very much a team sport. It's very much something that we need to do as a community. And you are all part of that community. You're not in the circle, you are the circle here in this conversation. So the question that I have for all of you is basically this. If you had to describe an equitable city. Your thoughts on equitable city. You had to try to summarize that in a word or in a city or at a place that you've been. What word would you use? It's a big challenge, that question. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about that and what word you might use to describe that, and then I will come. So if you give me a signal or if you raise your hand, I will come to you and you can share with us that word. While I do that, I did want to turn back to you, Dr. Dania, to ask you about some of the other climate and housing disparities in Lagos and the outcomes.
Thank you very much. I mean, listening to Nisera, I'm like, that is a reality, as in that is actually on ground, as in for informal people that live in informal settlements and slums. And so thinking about that, multiply the effect, because when you look at it, at the end of the day, we're talking about people who cannot afford those climate-resistant houses. These are people that are living from day to day for livelihood, as in doing things, as in to feed themselves and meet their basic needs. And they're the ones that end up in these communities, as in that are impacted the most by climate change. In Lagos, we're saying that if we do nothing, 165 square kilometers will be inundated by water. This would affect livelihoods of over 2 million people. 700,000 residents in those vulnerable communities will need to be relocated at a cost of about $6 billion. And more than half of these people are people that can't afford to go anywhere else. And that's minus the damages to infrastructure and other things that they require, and the communications, the roads, and all that. So whether we like it or not, there's a lot that needs to be done. Climate adaptation needs to happen. We need to begin to think about how do we adapt even within the slums. Because the truth of the matter is that a lot of slums are here to stay. So how do we improve basic amenities, wash services, even within those communities? The housing disparities are not going to go away overnight. We're not going to reshare income as in across cities, as in now, whether we like it or not. But how do we ensure that everybody has access, one way or the other, to climate-resistant housing? Very, very important.
Thank you. Okay, now you're on. So who would like to share a thought, a word, a vision? I see in the back there, and then I see in the front. So I'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Yvonne, and I think the first word that came to mind was probably peace. I feel like if you're, able to be at peace within your housing situation, at peace with your health, not fighting, air quality within urban areas or other things like that, then you're able to find peace within yourself, your environment, as well as your family too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for being here. I have actually a follow-up question about the informal settlements. No, I have a word. The word is visibility. And so the problem that I see, I currently reside in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, and 2 weeks ago, Santo Domingo suffered its worst rainfall event in history. And there was a neighborhood called Ocho Cienta, which is kind of hidden beside a really wealthy neighborhood, and it's built in a ravine. And after 400 nanometers of water fell, parts of it just totally collapsed. And I think an issue with it is a lot of illegal migrants live there too, and so the government doesn't want to acknowledge it. And so it's difficult to tackle a problem without the visibility of the problem, and it's just frankly ignored. And so I'd say visibility to answer your question. I'd like to pass it to Charles.
Yes. Again, thank you everyone for being here. I guess the word comes to mind is democratic, but more aligned with the true definition of democracy, of that it's an institution listening to its people, providing for its people through goods and services made up by the people, representing for the people. And I think we use that word a lot, but sometimes we forget what it really means.
Great words, visibility, peace, democracy in its truest form.
Thank you. I'm Cristina Arnés, a student at the Yale School of Public Health, and the word that came to my mind is green, because in green spaces, we know that most of the health effects that we were discussing today would be reduced, such as heat-related illnesses, as it reduces the urban heat island effect. It has positive effects for mental health. It's also a social justice problem, as the most vulnerable populations are usually not in green spaces. But I would also like to flag that in terms of resilience, the urban greening or the green spaces can bring unintended consequences or disservices, for example, in terms of mosquitoes. So it's also something to bear in mind for the resilience of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The word that came to my mind is aspiration. I think all of us move to cities with this aspiration and should have a chance to realize it.
Thank you. So beautifully said. Any last words before we come back to the panel? Yes?
Hello, my name is Charity from SDI. The word that I have in mind is transformation. For us to have the ability to see problems and even solutions as systems and address them, because the moment we address housing challenges, by extension, we are addressing public health, and we're also addressing climate issues. By extension, we're also addressing basic services provision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this is why you need the circle, because the circle adds so much value, so thank you. You can give yourselves a round of applause. Don't be shy. You need energy to build resilience, people. Come on. All right. I'm coming back to this amazing panel, and I am going to ask the panelists to try to keep each answer to about 2 minutes so we can hear from everyone with the time that we have. And the first one is really for Bijal and Nasira, although Susan, you also spoke to this very well, and that is, can you talk to us about more of these examples that this group can take with them around how to involve communities in decision-making processes to address resilience in climate, health, and housing?
Well, I'll just describe what we have been doing on the ground and what has worked best with these communities. I think first of all, because climate, as you said, it's an intersectional subject, and the first thing that we have been doing is we have been working with these groups to address their day-to-day needs like water, etc. And then they want to understand more about climate. Only then, if their short-term needs are. Once they put in that demand, we sort of unplug the scientific to a very simple way. So first, there is a demand generation by them at the city level. So they, so they demand that we want a solution to heat. Then probably, then there is a, they collect data and they provide it to the city. And then probably the city then co-creates solution. But I think the most important thing to do here is for them to get a table, to claim a space at the city level. So the city has to create such spaces. Like in India, we have ward level development plans being done with the communities. The communities then are able to voice it more scientifically, and that's what, gets them respect, earns them respect from the city.
Yes.
Solutions are co-created and then, implemented, where the communities also have a role, not only of a watchdog to get it implemented, but also perform their own duties, because it's always a joint job.
Absolutely.
And so that's when the cities really find communities very, very useful, it becomes a symbiotic relationship in that sense. That's what we have been trying to do in bringing in their voices and getting things done so that they include the last mile. Because I do think governments can give scale, but as long as you have to reach last mile, it's this kind of partnerships with CSOs and NGOs like us and people's organization, which enables the last mile delivery.
I want to underline what you said, because so much of what you're working on, I think many people in this room are also trying to do with our work, but the way you talk about it is so critical, is that you are looking at what people's absolute biggest priorities are. You're meeting them where they are, you're collecting their data, and then you're empowering them to get involved in existing processes with the city. And implicit in that is that you are building their capacity and you're empowering them to do that. And I think in a lot of what we've been talking about, that theme keeps coming up, and necessarily so, because you have to enable communities to articulate their needs in a way that the system can respond to, right? And closing that gap is a big part of this work that you're doing, and thank you for doing it. I think this is a good lesson for all of us as we continue this conversation. Nasira, I'll come to you.
Thank you for that question. I would say that we are experts in our own way. And I think it's the high time that the stakeholders build trust with communities in the sense that when you come to collect data in our communities, I think it is of essence and it is important you come back to tell us where you took our data and what you want to do with our data. I know we have different kinds of data, whereby we have the students' data, which doesn't come back to us. We have researchers, we have organizations that come to us to collect data. You find that, for example, like myself, I get asked questions each and every day, like 3 or 4 times at least. The fewer times I get asked questions each and every day, I will get 1 person or 2 persons asking me where I went to the toilet, what I ate yesterday, do you go to school, how many children you have, such kind of questions. And when they ask these questions, they don't come back. They just go away with my information. I think please trust the community, and also make sure that when you are doing all these, you engage us. Engage the community in all the processes. It is important. Because if we are talking about the resilience, there's no resilience without engaging the community. How can you talk about the resilience and you are not engaged? And I would also love to point out that we embrace the SDI model. I know also we have other organizations doing great work, whereby, for example, as we say, data is our DNA. When we take data from the community, we have to go back and we have to take that data back to the community and make sure they validate it. Then the other point that I'd love to say is that I think it's the high time we stop working in silos. We're having so many organizations working in the same community, working same projects, collecting same data. The data will be taken to the government for policies. Maybe it will be taken in different times. So you find that a lot of the work that is being done in the community, it might be done with 10 organizations. Why can't you come together and work together? For example, like in special planning area, just 1 minute, please. In Mukuru special planning area, we made sure that we brought 46 organizations, and they were working on 8 consortium. And that is why today we are celebrating Mukuru special planning area. And also with the ACRC, for example, we brought the stakeholders, the government, the organization, the community together to make sure that we are changing the narrative of how things are being done in the community, in cities. And yeah, sorry.
No, that's fantastic. And actually, that leads so well into the last question for the panel, and anyone is welcome to come in on this. I think you partially answered it, which is one of the most important things for cross-stakeholder collaboration to solve these issues is to start with who is going to convene and lead that and how these processes fit together. And so I do want to open that up to the panel. You know, how can cross-sector collaboration between policymakers, health professionals, housing professionals, construction companies, real estate developers, right? How can this come together more cohesively to build more equitable and resilient cities?
So in public health, we talk about social determinants of health and housing, education, capacity building, child development, food security, all of the energy security, all of these things are part of social determinants of health. And we say that they account for 55% of the variation in health, much more than healthcare itself. And so that is really important in terms of multi-sector engagement. We it's not whether or when, but that we must. And I'll close with the words sitting here in the Middle East in Dubai with Abu Bakr, because many of you were talking about data. and visibility. And I will say that knowledge without knowledge without action is futile. Let me get it right. Without knowledge, action is useless. And knowledge without action is futile. So we need to bring that data, the visibility, the evidence, and bring it to capacity building, to the people, and to action.
Thanks, Jeanette. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I have quite a few examples that I wanted to speak about, but I know time is short, so I'll try and sum it up. But I do think that, even the example that I spoke about earlier, our work in Honduras, we collaborated with the Honduran Red Cross, for example, to implement that project. So obviously the Red Cross is able to bring a whole host of services to that project that, are not within our scope of work. And in doing that, in partnering, we're able to meet needs, that span health, mental health, housing, and then we also partnered to bring some of those basic services, the solar energy and rain catchment systems, with providers that are experts in those particular areas. So we worked with them to install that technology. And then at the same time, we also build capacity of homeowners as we're going through that process. So that's another important stakeholder. They're involved throughout the process and learn what the technologies are so that they can also kind of know how to run things in their own home. So we've also done work with policymakers, particularly one recent example is in Colombia, where a national standard ICE 410 was recently adopted by the national government, and it's the first national standards relating to upgrading informal housing for resilience. So obviously in that kind of an example, we're working really closely with national government and with other advocates and people involved in making that kind of policy change.
Though this has been a very exciting COP for multi-level governance. So
Yes.
that's a conversation to definitely take forward. That we are a bit short on time, so I will say this. After this panel, there are breakout rooms on both sides of this area, so please do catch up with the speakers if there are particular points that you want to follow up on. I want to turn the word to you, Emmanuel. You've been listening to this conversation. You come from a different background, a very important background for investing in resilience. So opening it up to you to give us some of your thoughts as we begin to close this panel.
No, thank you. So, I feel so humble. Wrapping up what you say, I mean, I don't feel legitimate to wrap up what has been said. I heard those words about housing, but also schools, health, hospitals, communities, women, work at home. I heard those words of, if I have to choose a word, it's really together. For me, it's a very important word. Together and visibility. I liked also visibility. And I take this COP. It is the first time that buildings are really in the agenda of the COP. Just before this panel, there was the official launch of the Buildings Breakthrough. What is the Buildings Breakthrough? It's now 28 countries, big countries, small countries, from different geographies. You have China, you have US, France, Germany, but you have also Kenya. And the last one was Ghana that signed just before the Buildings Breakthrough, with countries committing that near zero emission and resilient buildings will be the new normal by 2030. So creating the condition, which is not only regulation, it's standards, it's capacity, it's involving all together the value chain everywhere to be able to create those conditions to make that near zero emission and resilient buildings is the new normal by 2030, addressing not only mitigation, but also adaptation, the cross of climate, energy, people, health. So I hope that more countries will join. There's a next step which will happen on the 7th and 8th of March in Paris, with the first Global Climate and Buildings Forum, where it is being expected that somewhere between 50 to 80 ministers in charge of construction will convey together to understand how to implement that ambition by 2030. It will be the first time that those ministers will come together to talk about buildings and climate, on mitigation, on adaptation. And that's visibility. I mean, if we are able to put it in the agenda, it will help also to mobilize at all levels, all the players together. But thank you a lot for all what has been said.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And I hope that this group, now that they know you and know about this important work, will be able to connect to you and that policy agenda and to bring communities and equity and health into that policy work. It sounds like it's going to be incredibly informative and coming down from the country level and connecting to cities and communities. I do want to circle back and bring in our graphic recorders here. So we're going to show their work here on the screen. So if you direct your attention to the screen. And we will share this with everyone through the Resilience Hub and continue to hold this space together for this work on climate, on resilience, on housing, and equitable communities all together. So, of course, take a picture if you like, but we'll also post this through the Resilience Hub website. And please join me in giving a round of applause for the graphic designers. As we close this panel, I want to remind everyone that the Resilience Hub and the organizations that I think that we're all working for have to continue to hold this space together. As I said earlier in this panel, resilience is very much a team sport. So everyone here has very much been called up, and let's keep working together. Thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking this panel.